we basically have been running an education system in California that has been drained by money that is being spent on legacy costs. I learned that they're lying about the math and that the consequences for school districts a decade from then were going to be disastrous.
David Crane, businessman, educator, and self-described policy wonk.
Former advisor to Governor of California Arnold Schwarzenegger, the founder of Govern for California.
He comes in and he's added 40,000 employees. They should cut that spending.
Well, David, great to be with you.
Nice to be here.
David Crane, the man, the legend, in your home. Thank you for letting us in your home. Beautiful spot.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure.
San Francisco. What do you think San Francisco means within the city right now? And to those looking from the outside in who don't understand San Francisco, just read the press.
I mean, this may come as a surprise, but it's pretty much the only place in California. There's one other place that gives me hope for California, San Francisco, of all places, because people got fed up. It's like, that movie Network when, he sticks his head out the window and said, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. And this little city with 700,000 people finally got fed up and people said, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. And there's been great political activism by ordinary people and political philanthropists. And the net result has been there's been enough power, political power, to offset the special interests that have run the city for too long. And things are changing here.
Yeah.
So it gives me hope. So I think to the rest of the country, San Francisco might not yet be viewed that way. But if they come here now, they can already see changes. I mean, I'm a regular BART rider, a regular Muni rider. I ride BART back from the airport. For a while, I wasn't doing it because it was so bad to be on BART. But I've been on BART a few times now back from the airport, and it's good. And I've walked home from the Mission, and it's better.
Well, it's good to hear that.
But downtown's, we need life downtown and all the rest.
So it's interesting you said that about San Francisco, David, because I lived in the city for many years, left when my ex was pregnant with our first. And, I talked to so many people, friends, colleagues in business and personal who don't live in California, who have such a negative view of California and San Francisco because they're reading the press, they're listening to media. And but I do think that there is a sea change happening in California, and there are a lot of people who are fed up, don't want to take it anymore, and are getting active, and things are changing, which is great.
From your mouth to God's ears.
Yes,
true,
yeah. I hope so. I think it is changing. You're a charismatic guy. You've got the brains. Why didn't you run? You've talked about, I've seen you interviewed in the past about maybe not regret for having not run for office yourself.
I wanted to run, and politics and policy were my sort of avocations, and I like this stuff. When Arnold and I met, we bonded over not bodybuilding, obviously, but we bonded over actually politics and policy, and we would have debates about the 1960 Democratic Party platform of all things, that sort of thing. So I always thought I would run, and when I left business when I was 50 and the recall election came along and Arnold asked me if I would help, and I went with him up there to Sacramento, I learned that I had the wrong temperament for that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
To succeed in that world requires a really unusual temperament. Not very many people have it. Lyndon Johnson had an extraordinary legislative temperament, not a very good executive temperament, but an extraordinary legislative temperament. So to be a governor or to be a legislative leader, you have to be able to deal with all kinds of people.
Oh, yeah.
To get anything done, you have to cut deals with everybody all the time. My temperament is not well suited to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at people across the country who are good at that, and I thank them for running for office as a result.
Yeah. Interesting observation. So you must have some stories about the Governor.
I have a lot. First of all, he's an extraordinary human being. I think people got a better sense of him from that documentary that was on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
I've never met anybody like him. And I met him I grew up in Denver, and a friend who I'd grown up in Denver with moved to Los Angeles in the late 1970s. And I was in school up here and dating Carla, who became my wife. And we would go down to Los Angeles a lot to visit my friend. And at the time, Arnold would be visiting him on occasion, and Arnold was dating Maria Shriver, so they would be together. And as I mentioned, we would get in discussions about the politics of the time. And this was the late 70s. So Carter was president. Reagan was getting ready to run. Arnold was not a US citizen. He couldn't vote, but he thought if he could have voted, he would have voted for this guy, Reagan. I was a Carter supporter. In fact, I got into debates with Maria Shriver because her uncle Teddy was challenging Carter for the nomination. And I thought Jimmy Carter, I still think this, never got the credit he deserved for appointing Paul Volcker to the Fed in 1979, which basically saved the US economy. Anyway, so we'd have all these discussions, and I could have told you then, he hadn't done Terminator, he had done Pumping Iron, I think, at that time. I probably said to people then, this guy's going to run for office someday. He is a working class guy who genuinely cares that people have opportunity. He genuinely believes in the American dream. And I thought he was going to run, and I'm glad he did.
Yeah. Is there a good story from the smoking tent? Is there something crazy, zany, interesting from that time?
You know, I wouldn't say, I'm not the best person to tell you about something crazy or zany about Arnold, because people will have lots of crazy. The discussions I had with Arnold, and we always had a good time together, but the discussions were very policy oriented. So from my standpoint, I enjoyed nothing more than having a deep policy discussion with him. And during that era, we had unbelievable debates about all kinds of things. I mean, Arnold wanted to do universal health care after Romney, or at about the same time Romney did it in Michigan. And I wasn't a fan of what people on his team wanted to do. So the debates over the issues were the things that resonate with me. And then we had these massive fiscal issues, and I discovered something I knew nothing about when he appointed me to the board of the state teachers retirement system, which is the second largest pension fund in the country. And I learned that they're lying about the math, and that the consequences for school districts a decade from then were going to be disastrous unless they did something. There aren't that many governors that I could have dealt with who understood that math as well as he understood the math. He understands the math. He understands investment. He understands compounding. He understands the consequences of reverse compounding. So I just think that's the stuff I remember about Arnold, is the serious stuff, and that's what I wanted.
Yeah. Well, listen, let's talk about something that's near and dear to your heart that you've been communicating about, putting out content about, which is the upcoming governor's race and the election 2026. It's going to be here before we know it. What do you think are the top couple criteria, qualifications for the next governor?
It's a great question. Let me back into it by saying what that person is going to be inheriting. The current governor, by his own admission, who has dipped into the state's reserves, even though there hasn't been a recession. So the reserves were established to defend the state in the event of a recession. He's dipped into them to cover massive overspending, largely in the behalf of campaign contributors.
19 billion last time?
I don't know what it is.
I think it was about 19 billion last cycle.
But we spend about $2 trillion, including the fiscal year for which he has proposed, which is the one that starts July 1. It's $1.97 trillion that have been spent in the Newsom administration. And you have to ask yourself, what is there to show for it? Nearly $300 billion of that is for public employees, who also happen to be among his largest contributors. And in doing all this, he is, rather than cut spending when we started to have some fiscal issues, he dipped into reserves, which are needed in the event of a recession, to the point that by his own math, he forecasts negative reserves at the state by the time the next governor takes office. So the next governor is going to have to be someone who knows how to navigate a state that has negative reserves, that might be entering a recession at that point, and is getting very little value for money. We're spending $115 billion this year on K through 12 education. The outcomes are worse than they were when I went up there with Schwarzenegger in 2003. We're spending in grand total about the same amount on healthcare. We actually get fairly good results out of what we spend on Medicaid in California, but the funding for that is likely to be under distress because of what the federal government's going to do. So they're going to have to navigate that. And we basically have been running an education system in California that has been drained by money that is being spent on legacy costs. So The reason I got kicked off the board of Cal Stirs in 2006 is because I said if they had to boost contributions then, or else they'd have these massive deficits in a decade. They didn't do it. They kicked me off the board instead. They got the massive deficits, and that money is constantly draining school districts, so they can't pay their current teachers enough money. That next governor is going to have to deal with all that, plus an environment in which economic mobility is more challenged than it's been in decades. That's why people leave California.
Least affordable state in the union.
Yeah. So I just think that person is going to have to be, I can use examples. The kind of person that I admire as governor would be someone like Gina Raimondo, who was the governor of Rhode Island and the Commerce Secretary under President Biden. Mitt Romney was an excellent governor in Massachusetts. They're people that are financially literate and have the right temperament to deal with very complex problems and ultimately care about something greater than themselves, even though they got to make compromises all along the way.
You're talking about two leaders who worked successfully across the aisle, and you're talking about two leaders who bucked orthodoxy and did some things that were difficult, unpopular. Bringing it back to California, David, do the Democrats still have the right to run the state? Why isn't it time for a change to let the other party run the state? And who do you like for governor in that context?
So the first thing is the Democrats are not a monolith. The answer to your question is the Democrats are not a monolith, and the Republicans played a major role in getting California to this position that it's in right now.
With Reagan, maybe, right? But isn't that history?
Oh, no, it's not just Reagan. Reagan signed the legislation in '68 that granted collective bargaining rights to public employees, which they didn't have before. And that launched the state onto the path that it's on right now. But it was much worse. There were all kinds of Republicans voted overwhelmingly in 1999 alongside Democrats for SB 400, which was a retroactive pension increase, which was the largest issuance of debt in California history. They were overwhelmingly in favor of that. When Schwarzenegger tried to get a pension reform done in 2010, we even had Democrats. It wasn't a great pension reform. It wasn't going to fix everything, but it was a little bit. Who did he get blindsided by? The Republicans, who were worried about offending the prison guards union. And they knew that Schwarzenegger was going out of office, but the prison guards union was going to be there forever. So they better not do something that the prison guards union didn't like. And I don't blame the prison guards union for that. They're very good at protecting their interests, but the politicians were the ones who make those decisions, and those were Republicans. So I don't think it's a party thing so much. It's an individual thing. This is mostly a Democratic state, so what it's going to require is a Democrat who is willing to challenge the establishment. And the establishment in California is government unions, trial lawyers, and groups like that, but dominated by government unions.
Yes.
And I don't blame them for what they do. That's their job, is to look out for, get as much as they possibly can. But legislators in California have been dominated by them for too long, and it's, in my view, going to have to be a Democrat. This is going to have to change. Raimondo did that in Rhode Island. She was gutsier than Romney in Massachusetts. Romney had to go across the aisle and cut a deal with the Democrats. But Raimondo, a Democrat, had to get Democratic legislators to stand up to government employee unions who were big powers behind the Democratic.
Bigger deal.
Yeah.
Bigger deal.
And that kind of person is incredibly rare.
Yes. Well, let's come back again to the field. Kamala hasn't decided. She's probably going to run. I mean, when her team looks at national polling on 2028 for her, it's not good. She wants a government paycheck. She wants to keep her political career rolling. She's probably going to run. What does that mean for California?
Disaster. She's the old guard.
Yes.
The old guard in California, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, there are people who have had their path created for them by kowtowing to the establishment. That's true of Newsom. That is true of Kamala Harris. That's true of virtually every Democrat. The only Democrat who was announced, who's running, who has ever shown any guts against the establishment is Antonio Villaraigosa, the former mayor of Los Angeles, the former speaker, a former labor organizer who stood up for kids when he was mayor of LA, for kids in LA public schools. Everybody else in the field is a usual suspect. And they came up through the Democratic power machine And none of them have shown any willingness to challenge the powers that be in that party. Kamala Harris is a very good example of that. The great thing, I've coined this phrase, this great arbitrage that exists in politics in California. I think this is true probably everywhere. Voters tend to pay attention to what politicians say, but special interests pay attention to what they do. So people like Kamala Harris, this is true of virtually every Democrat, and this is true of lots of Republicans. Gavin Newsom, they say a lot, and by doing so, they signal virtue to this group and that group and this group that they want to please. But quietly, they're always doing the bidding of the special interests. So at the same time, Newsom likes to carry himself as a progressive and all the rest, but he's always signing legislation that benefits powerful entities in California, whether it's utilities, whether it's prison guards unions, whether, the most shameful policy in my experience in California, I've been here since 1977, the most shameful policy I've ever seen in California was the shutdown of our schools for 2 years, longer than any other state. And it took guts for especially a Democratic governor to stand up to government employee unions, to teachers unions, and say, look, we got to open the schools. Someone like Gina Raimondo did that in Rhode Island. Republicans like Ron DeSantis did it in Florida, but he probably didn't have the same obstacles that a Democrat would have had. In California, Newsom did exactly what the unions wanted him to do.
Right.
And Kamala Harris would have been the same way. I have no doubt about it.
No doubt.
She appealed the Vergara decision, which was a lawsuit that was brought by 9 poor and minority students in Southern California in the LA school district, that California's education code violated their civil rights, equal protection and more. That case won because of things like last in, first out termination of teachers, because of things like tenure, which is granted after just 2 years of teaching. It's really effectively only 18 months of teaching. Things like that, they said, violated their civil rights. They won in the district court. The state did not have to appeal that. Kamala Harris was Attorney General. She chose to appeal it. She didn't have to do that, just the way Schwarzenegger didn't have to, and Jerry Brown, when he was Attorney General, didn't have to appeal the gay marriage decision on behalf of the state. They chose not to. She chose to do that because the unions wanted her to. She would govern the state the same way.
How bad is California's overall fiscal situation? Is California solvent if you look out 5-10 years?
States can't declare bankruptcy, and states have the power to tax. So I got to answer your question with a little bit of complexity. You asked if California is solvent. It's solvent if it can keep raising taxes. And because it can't declare bankruptcy, it means it will just keep raising taxes or coming up with revenues to meet obligations, unless taxpayers rebel or leave the state or something like that. Or since we're so dependent on so few taxpayers who are at the upper end, enough of them would have to leave so they would not have the money. But they can't declare bankruptcy. Local governments can declare bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. And that happens. That happened in Vallejo, that happened in Stockton, and they can discharge a lot of their obligations that way. So what happens instead to a state like California is not that it's not insolvent. It's just like a frog that is slowly being boiled. And you can see that in California very clearly in the public schools. When pension costs, which exist, the reason we have rising pension costs in California is not because of the size of the pensions or even as a result of having a defined benefit pension plan. It's because of the rate at which they pre-funded those pensions.
Yes. And
by not pre-funding them properly, they created these massive deficits. And those massive deficits led to school districts having to, for example, in LA, quadruple their pension spending in 4 years. I think it was 3 years, 4 years, they quadrupled their spending. So what happens in that case is that everybody gets squeezed out. The new teachers don't get higher salaries. They don't hire as many teachers, et cetera. That's the frog being boiled to death. At the state level, that happens all the time now because of escalating spending on pensions and retiree health care, which is another post-employment benefit, continuing increases, certainly under Gavin Newsom, in salary increases for public employees. What gets squeezed? UC and CSU, courts, parks, and all the other things that come out of the discretionary portion of the general fund. That's a frog slowly being boiled. Look at the share of California's general fund captured today by the University of California versus 20 years ago, that sort of thing. That's a frog being boiled to death. So California is solvent as long as it can continue to tax. What matters is the impact that those expenses are having now on school budgets, on the state budget. I think, I'm guessing at LAUSD, 15% of their budget goes right out the door to service pensions and retiree health care. That's a big share of your budget to go to legacy costs, nothing current.
Yes.
That's what matters, and it's going to get worse.
Yeah. Let's talk about the budget. It's budget season. We have another budget crisis looming. Tens and tens and tens of billions of dollars underwater, right, with the current budget. What should the governor and the legislature in California do if they're acting in a responsible way, thinking about not just today, but the next governor?
Cut spending on employees. So the overwhelming expenditure, the lion's share of government expenditures in California go to government employees.
Any organization is mostly people.
Yeah,
especially
I mean,
government.
it's not true with the federal government. It's really interesting as they do this DOGE stuff. You know, it's some very clever pundit once put it, you know, the federal government is an insurance company with an army. So the federal government, you know, will spend $6 trillion this year or whatever, and it only has about 6 million employees or fewer, and half of those are military.
Yes.
Most of the federal government spending is insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and then there's defense and interest, not personnel. State and local governments are almost entirely about personnel.
And the private sector is mostly personnel.
So what you find in California, you know, there are 20 million state and local employees in the United States, much more than at the federal level. And California's, the lion's share of the budget goes to public employees. And those public employees are the most powerful political entities in the state. They weren't always that way, you know. Ronald Reagan gave them the right to have collective bargaining in 1968. Before that, they didn't have it. Jerry Brown expanded it to state employees and school employees. And this year, for example, the Governor Newsom proposes to spend $45 billion in the state budget, the third largest expenditure after health and K through 12 is $45 billion of spending on 255,000 employees. That $45 billion compares to $32 billion 6 years ago when Jerry Brown left office. The number of employees actually went up, even in a world where everybody else is learning how to do more with fewer employees. And Governor Newsom even wrote a book in 2014 called Citizenville, where he talked about the status quo shouldn't be maintained. We need all these digital services, better services for citizens, etc. He comes in and he's added 40,000 employees. He's raised salaries to $28 billion a year from, I think it was $20 billion or so when he took office. They should cut that spending. They should rationalize employment. They should stop giving prison guards salary increases when they're already paid twice the national average.
Twice the national average.
They should stop accepting political contributions from all the 21 bargaining units that Governor Newsom deals with when they bargain the contracts. They should not accept any political contributions from them. You go back and look at the money that the prison guards union gave Governor Newsom in 2021, and a month or two later, they got an enormous salary increase. I don't think these things are just coincidental.
Just go back 1 second. Our prison guards in California are paid twice the national average.
Yes.
Why?
Political power. Prison guards in California, and again, you should not blame them, and nobody would, I mean, these are not easy jobs. It's not like I'm willing to be a prison guard. But the pay should be market pay. And they've had, I mean, the story of how they got the power is just extraordinary. And it might be interesting for people who want to dive into this, but as I mentioned, California didn't have collective bargaining rights. There were no government unions until 1968, when Ronald Reagan signed a bill that granted it to local and county employees only, who were overwhelmingly public safety and overwhelmingly Republican. So it had to be because he was trying to generate funding from a special interest. Jerry Brown comes in as governor in 1975 and told me this when I said, why did you extend it to teachers and state employees? And he said, what was I going to do? Reagan had granted it to local employees. Do you think I could not extend it to people who had supported me for governor? So they extended to state employees, school employees in 75, state employees, including prison guards, in 1977. Proposition 13 happens in 1978. The state starts to consolidate all this power at the state after that because of legislation that was passed to bail out local governments. At the very same time that state employees got greater bargaining power and more influence over state officials. California, somewhat coincident with that, after Jerry Brown had signed the Determinant Sentencing Act in 1975, our prison population goes like this. Governors, Republican and Democrat alike, expanded the size of prisons, gave prison guards more and more jobs. Prison guards donate to governors, and that cycle just constantly continues. That's how you end up earning twice the national average. That's how you end up getting salary increases in the middle of a current contract like they got in 2021, which happened to coincide with the recall election. It's political power, and you can't blame the unions. I don't blame them. I don't blame the corporations, or I don't blame, the ag interests, or the Stuart Resnicks of the world, these big ag interests who donate to politicians because they're trying to improve their interests. I blame the politicians for accepting it and not doing the people's work, instead doing those other people's work.
I heard you say that there was a quid pro quo between the prison guard union and Newsom in the recent past, contributing to his longstanding shadow run for the presidency, PACs and otherwise, and getting big compensation increases. I mean, that's been reported in the press. You've just commented on it. I think that's probably the most shameful part of politics, maybe the most shameful part of politics in California.
Well, first of all, it's not a quid pro quo. It's illegal. You can't say, I'll give you this donation in exchange for the salary increase. But you can look at the facts and you can see.
Feels like a quid pro quo.
You can draw your inferences and you can see all that happening. And I agree with you. It's the most shameful. It's among the most shameful.
Among the
things.
most shameful.
The most shameful, like I said, but it's related to that was the shutdown of the schools for 2 years.
Yes.
And we still need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission about that. What happened in California, shutting down schools that long. The state still has not addressed it, and the censorship that took place during that time as well. So anyway, you asked this question about the rotation between donations between government employees and healthcare corporations and utilities and political officials, and how those political officials end up doing their bidding. It all feeds into what I mentioned earlier about the great political arbitrage. Voters don't pay attention to those things. They pay attention to what politicians say. And nobody is better at saying things than Gavin Newsom. But the utilities and the prison guards and the healthcare corporations and all the rest are paying attention to what he does.
Not what he says. I want to make a quick aside. If you enjoy this show, please follow us. Please subscribe so you don't miss an upcoming episode. David, let's talk about a couple of things before we close up together. The business climate in the state and the exodus of so many entrepreneurs and companies out of the state. You know as well as anyone that the top 1% of taxpayers in the state of California, through their gains and otherwise, pay about 40% of the taxes in the state of California, which is an unbelievable stat that most people don't know. What's it going to take in the next, say, 5 years to turn the economic climate around in California so that people can thrive here and entrepreneurs actually want to come here to open up businesses or return to bring their businesses, their headquarters, their tax base, and their employees back to California?
I don't know. I characterize it as, a diminution in economic mobility. We have like 20 million private sector workers, and they're dependent upon people starting businesses and running businesses, and those businesses have to flourish. Our unemployment rate, I think, is the second highest in the country now, materially larger than the national rate. I was in business. I don't think I would be interested in, it's been a long time, but starting a business in California now because of all the difficulties, the tax rates, the regulations. Somebody has a bill in the legislature right now to create more bounty hunting, where trial lawyers can do private rights of action to go after people who should only be gotten after by public authorities. So running a business in the state is not a proposition that I would undertake lightly. And I think what's going to have to change is wholesale. It's not just make it affordable so people can live here. That has to happen as well. You got to give people confidence that they're going to be treated fairly. And I think as long as you have a legislature that is too close to trial lawyers, or a legislature that is too close to and a governor that are too close to the people that constantly want to raise taxes so they can increase the spending on hospitals or comp and benefits for state employees, that sort of thing, businesses are going to shrink from being here.
What's the impact of local or city level budget mismanagement a la LA on the infrastructure or the services, day-to-day lives of citizens?
You know, you can see the frog being boiled better at local governments than anywhere else in California. So you look at Los Angeles, where the sidewalks never get repaired. People have just put up with sidewalks that are like this as the tree.
No one walks.
It's a fair point. No one walks in Los Angeles.
But
well, my
seriously.
daughter lives there, and I walk there when I'm with her. But yeah, it's stuff like that. But they don't have sufficient fire suppression equipment. They don't have, sufficient fire hydrants and that sort of thing. And it's largely because money is being pushed off to other things, like salary increases. I mean, the mayor of Los Angeles gave a large salary increase to the employees down there, and pension costs and retiree healthcare costs. Those things are just eating up the budget, so they don't have it for current services. In that case, the frog has been sort of cooked.
So let me get this. Budget malfeasance in Los Angeles is blocking the city's ability to fight fires successfully.
Yes.
That's horrible.
Yeah. Budget malfeasance, redirection of funds to special interests in Los Angeles for decades has left that city in a position, it's true of Oakland as well, a position where they can't provide basic services to citizens.
Let's do a little rapid fire to finish up. You game?
Sure.
Okay. You're king for a day in California. What do you change to turn California around? Single biggest thing.
Adopt FDR's approach and do not allow government unions to exist. No collective bargaining rights for government employees.
A very popular guy in California.
Yeah.
Which,
by the way, they should have civil service protections and all the other rights. And I'm completely in favor of private sector unions. They can do what they want because there's a tension there between management, which reports to shareholders, and labor, unions, which report to labor. But in the government, the employees end up controlling management because of political contributions that are made by collectively bargained unions.
Yeah, does not make sense. What's your greatest hope for the state of California?
Well, it is the most remarkable place on the planet. You know, we have this resource curse. That's why we have lousy governance. So like Saudi Arabia, I don't want to offend Saudi Arabia, but they have oil and therefore you don't have to govern quite as well. And I like to say that Indiana doesn't have what we have, so they have to govern well. California, we have this gorgeous climate and everything like that. And so you get away. People will put up with absolutely terrible governance. So what do I hope? I hope for Californians to pay attention to what their elected officials are doing and become activists so that they can make their state not only a beautiful place to live, but a place that is very well governed and efficiently governed.
Yeah, it's such a good point that we have an embarrassment of riches. The people, the topography, the weather, the industry, we've got everything, and yet we can't get it done. Last one, California is magic.
I mean, is there any place like it? It's like Arnold used to, I think when he was governor, they had these ads about you can go skiing in the morning and then you can go swimming on the beach, later in the day. That kind of, there's just no place like it on the planet. So it's magic.
Magic, I like it. All right, well, it's good to have talked with public enemy number one of the state unions in California. It's an honor. Thank you, David.
Thanks for having me.